All right. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Tycho, and I am the career coach for business industries at SUNY Oswego. And today we are so lucky to have with us Sam Lavoie, Group Talent Manager at Enterprise, to talk about interviewing tips. So I'll hand it over to Sam.
All right, thanks so much, Tycho. I'm very excited to be here with SUNY Oswego students. So we're going to talk some strategies for successful interviewing. For those of you that may be interviewing for the next step in your career, maybe it is for an internship that you have coming up, or maybe it's just to learn a little bit more because it's a skill that you want to work on a little bit. So we're going to go through kind of some tips on the different types of interviews. As we know, this is a virtual learning event. So with technology evolving, so does some of the daily tasks, and that involves with businesses and getting hired as well. So we'll go through all this. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to put them in the chat, and looking forward to some good Q&A at the end as well. Just to give you guys a little background about me and kind of who I am. So I am the Group Talent Manager for Enterprise Rent-A-Car. We are a tri-branded company, so that includes more than just Enterprise. That also includes Alamo Rent-A-Car and National Car Rental as well. My title as Talent Manager is kind of a dual role in the HR sector. So I have kind of a two-part component. I get to oversee our talent acquisition team, so the team that does all the hiring in upstate New York, and then I also get to oversee our training and development initiatives as well. So I get to do kind of what I like to say the two fun sides of HR. The territory that me and my team cover, which is pretty much everything from Albany west in New York, so everything Syracuse, Rochester, and Buffalo, and then we have a few locations in very northern Pennsylvania. So there's a little bit about me and my team, so let's kind of jump right into the successful interviewing strategy. So some things that we're going to cover together today. And can everyone see the PowerPoint okay? Are we good? Okay, fantastic.
Yes.
Thanks. We are going to talk about prepping for the interview. So a lot of getting the job or getting the internship really even starts before you walk in the door, before you talk to the hiring managers or the recruiters. So what can you do to make sure that you are fully prepared for that interview? We're going to talk through the interview itself. So what are some tips for phone interviews? What are some tips for virtual interviews? So kind of like the interaction we're having today. Phone interviews and virtual interviews are two different things. And then we'll talk about in-person interviews as well. And then what we like to use in sales is ABC, always be closing. So we got to talk about the interview. How do you close the interview? How do you leave a lasting impression after you've done all the prep work, after you've gone through the actual interview? How do you close strong? Because that's always a good, important part as well. So let's start with prepping for the interview. First and foremost, obviously, a professional image is always going to be important. It's going to be the first thing that the interviewer or recruiter, those may be two different things depending on the company and the process, but it's going to be the first thing that everybody sees, right? They always say that it takes 7 seconds to make a first impression. So if your professional image isn't as professional or neat as you'd like it to be, that may set the tone for the day. It may set the tone for how you feel and how you walk into that interview. So always making sure that you've got that professional image and that you look your best. Know the company. We'll talk a little bit about that. What are some things that you should look for in the company? But first and foremost, if you want the job, you got to find out why you want the job, right? So know the company, doing some research. Again, we'll break that down in just a minute. Knowing yourself. Those are some things that you really need to focus on. That's what you're going to talk about. In an interview, oftentimes people will tell me in the thousands of interviews I've done over the years is, oh, I feel like I'm bragging, or I feel like I'm being too confident. Well, this is the time to talk about yourself, right? This is the time to talk yourself up, because if you don't, who's going to do that? Your resume speaks for itself, but it's only going to get you so far. Typically, a resume will get you to the table, but then the interview is the process that's actually going to earn the job or earn the offer. So you need to know yourself and be able to talk about yourself throughout the interview as well. And then we are going to cover some do's and some don'ts. I'll share some experiences that I've seen in the 6 years that I've had on the talent acquisition side, the 6 years I've had of interviewing for all different types of positions within our company. And again, remember, it only takes 7 seconds to make a first impression. So you always want to set the tone first, kind of coming into it as you prepare for the interview. So let's dive into professional image. What is professional image? For some, they may see that as business professional, business casual. It could be a wide variety of things, depending upon the company that you're interviewing with. Some companies have a little bit more of a casual environment to where maybe jeans and a t-shirt is the day-to-day norm, where others, they are required in more of a suit type of environment. So definitely make sure when you're doing your research, you know that ahead of time. I've always been a firm believer that to be dressed a little bit more on the conservative side, wearing a suit. Even if their day-to-day isn't in a suit, you're not an employee yet for that company. So you need to make sure that you're dressed professionally and that you're kind of dressed to the nines as you're walking in there. So you want to be neat and organized. You want to make sure your clothing is pressed and clean. And then as far as your hairstyle, you want to make sure that it's neat and professional. Be careful of trends. I know that obviously there are certain things going into different interviews of different trends with bright colors or maybe really high heels for some of the girls. So just be aware of the trends. I would say staying more on the conservative side and letting your personality and letting your answers rather than your outfit speak for themselves in the actual interview process. And then earrings, piercings, and tattoos, that's going to be kind of something that is contingent upon the company. We at Enterprise, we are a very conservative company. We are actually founded by a Navy fighter pilot. So Jack Taylor, when he started Enterprise, he brought a lot of his conservative military background to us. So that does mean that for males, no piercings or no earrings being shown, no visible tattoos and things like that. But other companies have different thoughts and processes on it. So if you're ever curious, what do I wear on a daily basis? What is acceptable? What is not acceptable? Best person to ask is always going to be the recruiter, and they're going to kind of give you all that you need to know when it comes to attire. But if you're unsure, where you can go on the conservative side is going to be the best place to start, and then they'll let you know if, hey, you have a suit on today, you don't need to bring that to the next round, or you don't need to wear that to the next interview. So there's kind of some input for you on professional image. So next, in prepping for the interview, you want to know the company. You want to do the research about the company and do the research about the industry. First and foremost, you want to make sure that it aligns with what you're looking for. If you are looking to be in business, then this may be something that aligns here with Enterprise. If you hate everything that there is to know about cars and you don't care about them, well, then maybe Enterprise isn't the best bet for you, right? Because our business is cars and renting them. So know the industry and do your research specifically about the company history. You want to look for things that are important to you. You know, they always say that if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life. And I think that, you know, I'm a firm believer in that. You want to find a company that has the same missions and the same values that you do. You want somebody that if they're passionate about their people and you want to be taken care of as an employee, you want an employer that does that. So you want to make sure that the mission statement and the values that that company is founded on, that they align with what you're looking for, because then that's naturally going to create a better environment and a better culture for what you want to do. Review the job description. I don't know if you guys can relate to this, but when I was coming out of school about 10 years ago, when I was doing a bunch of different research, my major was actually marketing, and I found myself applying to anything that had the word marketing in the title. And then I quickly realized that some job descriptions can be a little bit deceiving, right? So instead of thinking that I was working for this company, doing all of these cool marketing analysis and marketing of different products, I actually found it out that I would be in like a Sam's Club or a Costco selling memberships. So do the research, review the job description, so that way when you walk in, you have a full understanding of what is the role, how am I going to be the best match for this position. So doing that research ahead of time will help you not waste your time on any roles that you're like, maybe that isn't the best bet for me. And then have a resume that's focused on that position. It doesn't have to be everything aligned to it, but if someone is coming to me and where we're in a sales and customer service role and they have a strong history and a background in teaching, well, obviously those are kind of two different things. So I'm going to want to see something parallel. I'm going to want them to talk about how their past experience, maybe in the teaching industry, would translate over into our business. So it doesn't have to be perfect and align 100%, but if someone has a different business name in their objective, or if it says they want to be an accountant, but they're applying to our management trainee position, just be aware of that as you're changing your resume. Make sure that you're making all necessary edits as you're applying to different companies and for different positions if you have stuff in your resume that is very specific. Next step in prepping, you want to know yourself. So if you haven't already, take a look at kind of some of these questions, and I'm going to share this PowerPoint with Tycho at the end so you guys can go back and kind of take a look through some of it, but these are some good questions to start off. What are your skills, strengths, values, and weaknesses? I am always a firm believer. I like to do a SWOT analysis. So if you've never done one of those, you can Google it and pull one up and print it out and fill out your own SWOT analysis, because you want to do that self-identification of what are my skills? What am I really good at? Where do I do really well? And maybe instead of weaknesses, what are some of my areas of opportunity that I know that I need to work on? And it really helps kind of line that out for you so you know what skills that you have and where you can really speak confidently going into an interview. I think the biggest thing for me where a lot of people miss the boat in an interview is, what are your goals? I will ask that to every single candidate that I interview. Where do you see yourself in 3 to 5 years? What is your timeline? And I find that a lot of times people don't do enough self-reflection on that question. They don't really take a look at, I see myself being a leader in a company. I see myself being a controller. I see myself being a CEO one day, and whatever that may mean for you. But oftentimes people don't ask themselves that question, so that when I do ask that question in an interview, they struggle to answer. And, you know, I never saw myself in an HR recruiting role when I joined the company 10 years ago. No idea. So when I interviewed 10 years ago, my 3 to 5 year goal would have been very different than where I'm at. And that's okay. But I think the thing is, you want to have an understanding, or you want to have at least some sort of direction for yourself, so that way the hiring manager or the recruiter can see if that aligns with the long-term growth of the company as well. And at the end of the day, the biggest thing for me is I want it to be a match. I want you to work at Enterprise just as much as we want you to work at Enterprise. So if we find that maybe your goals don't align with ours, that's okay too. But really asking yourself that question and finding an answer to that, I think is always a great place to start. And then what are your transferable skills on your resume? I think a lot of times people look at, especially fresh college students such as yourself, you look at some of your experience, and you're like, well, I don't have any real world business experience. That's okay. Were you a leader of a club? Were you a leader of a group project? Were you involved with a sports team where you've worked together with other people and in a competitive environment? Were you a part of student council? Did you do voluntary work where you worked and communicated with other people? A lot of times, some of the things that you work on and you do on a day-to-day basis, it parallels to a lot of those other skill sets. So you kind of have to dial some of that back and figure out, okay, I may not have been in a managerial role, but I led a group of my peers in a group project. Or we were doing a fundraiser, so I need to show my competitive side. We had a goal that we had to reach, and I was able to reach that goal with the fundraiser. So just really have a good understanding of what are those transferable skills, and then how does it align to certain competencies that that job is looking for. And all of those competencies are typically listed under that job description when you're applying. So I feel like I've been giving a lot of information at you. I don't see any questions in the chat. Is everybody good? Okay, I'm going to keep moving forward. So the first type of interview that I want to talk about is a phone interview. I don't know what your thoughts are on phone interviews. Me personally, they can be make or break. They can be a little awkward sometimes too, just because you don't have that personal connection. With a virtual interview, even though you are over the computer and it may not have that in-person effect, at least you can see the individual. Phone interviews tend to be a little challenging because you don't have that face-to-face interaction with them. So we've got to make the best that we can with the situation that we're given. So here are some hopeful tips for you on phone interviews. Always be ready for the call 15 minutes early. Typically when I'm doing phone interviews, I schedule them back to back, but if I finish early with one, I may pick up the phone and call the next person a few minutes early. If they don't answer, that's okay. I still give them up until their time and then a few minutes after for them to call me back. But if I'm kind of in the flow and doing a bunch of interviews back to back, I may call someone a few minutes early. So always be ready at least 15 minutes early. Don't use speakerphone. This is the hard one because it's easy if you're doing an interview and maybe you're taking notes as the recruiter, the hiring manager is speaking, but oftentimes speakerphones can sound very echoey. It's hard to understand the individual. And you want to make sure that there's no background noise. So find a quiet place with no interruptions and background noise. If you're walking around, some people like to pace. Some people like to kind of move while they're doing phone interviews. If you're doing that, just be very aware of what sounds may be going on. A recruiter or hiring manager for a phone interview, we can hear a lot of background noise, and it can be very distracting. We may find ourselves listening to that background noise of you walking versus actually listening to the answer that you're providing us. So make sure that you're in a quiet place. I like to share an experience of my own. I remember when I was a senior in college and my friends were having a little bit of fun because it was warm. I actually grew up in Atlanta, so it's nice and warm there. We're having a pool day, and they decided to make some fun beverages in the blender. And I'll never forget, I was up in my room on a phone interview with the company, and all you could hear in the background was like the blender being as they were making things. And I just knew I didn't get a second interview. And so I didn't take the time to say, hey guys, I really need some peace and quiet. And I wish I would have done that. So learn from my experience. Don't let the background noise and everything else around you kind of take over that phone interview for you. Speak up. Sometimes it may feel like you're yelling, but they are probably using speakerphone on their end because they're taking notes during the interview. So just because they're using speakerphone on their end, don't use speakerphone on your end. So make sure that you're speaking up, you are articulating your words, and you're speaking slow and concisely as well. You want to smile through the phone. I know, I just got a question. I'm going to read that. Yes, absolutely. I love that, Emily. Dress the part, even if you're not being seen. I think it helps you get in a professional mindset. I'm a firm believer in that instead of in your pajamas. Absolutely. So dress that part, get ready, get up for the day, treat it as if it would be an in-person interview. Absolutely. Thanks for that tip as well. Smile through the phone. Again, I know that it kind of goes hand in hand, I think, with dress for the part. I know it's silly, but you probably wouldn't sit across from an interviewer with a straight face or with a frown on your face either. You'd probably smile throughout the interview. So do the same because it does make a difference. You can hear that over the phone for the interviewer. Build rapport quickly. So what I mean by this is, you want to make a good impression, just as you would walk in a professional environment. You want to try and build rapport with the person as quickly as you can so that they want to meet you. Some phone interviews are more of like prelim processes to where it's maybe 5 to 10 minutes and they're kind of just looking at resumes, asking a couple very basic questions and then narrowing down the applicant pool. Other phone interviews are going to be a little bit more long and extensive where they're asking actual questions about your skill set. So be prepared for both. And if it is that 5 to 10 minute interview, try the best you can to build rapport quickly with them. So that way they want to get you in person or they want to continue the process with you. Another thing that's really tough is the silence piece. I think sometimes when an interviewer asks a question and then maybe you provide an answer and you stop talking and you've completed your answer, we as the recruiter on the other side, we may just be taking notes. So we may not say anything immediately once you finish that answer. And what I've found is sometimes candidates want to jump in right away and they want to keep talking because that silence can feel a little awkward. So they're trying to fill that void. Just remember that silence is okay. I typically, if that's me, I'll acknowledge the candidate and let them know, say, thanks so much, I'm just taking a couple notes. So that way that they know that. But just remember, give it a couple seconds and silence will be okay. The interviewer will continue to carry on. All right, so let's talk about virtual interviews. So this is going to be like your Skype, your Zoom, your WebEx interviews. I say treat it as it's an in-person interview. So just as Emily referenced on the phone interview that you want to dress for the part, absolutely. You want the professional image. They say don't dress for the part just from the top up, dress from the part top to bottom, right? Because what if maybe there's a malfunction and you need to stand up and you can't, you have your pajama bottoms on. We don't want that. So treat it just as you would an in-person interview. Get up, get ready for the day, and just as you would if you were going to someone's company or someone's office. Test the platform ahead of time. I don't know how many times you probably have experienced it, but just when we want it to work, sometimes it feels like technology doesn't want to work, right? So make sure that you're testing that platform ahead of time. Make sure you're testing the background around you. Make sure you're testing your volume and your audio as well to make sure that it all works and it goes seamless so you can connect right away and jump right into the interview. Neutral background, good lighting with no distractions. So you want to create the right environment that you would for the interview. So you don't want anything kind of crazy in the background. or anything that would distract the person from listening to you as well. All right, so let's talk about in-person interviews. So I've got some do's. So in-person interviews, the biggest thing is to practice. How do you practice? A couple ways. You can practice with mock interviews. So maybe you practice with a friend, maybe you practice with a family member, or another way to practice for mock interviews is actually practicing in your mirror. So being able to see, what does my face look like when I'm providing an answer? So that way you can see what the interviewer is going to be on the other side. Another good tip when it comes to mock interviews, I'd highly recommend recording yourself. I know oftentimes people don't enjoy the sound of their own voice. However, you can see if you use any transition words like so, if you pause too long, if maybe your speed and your tempo is a little fast as you're speaking. So always go in, try and record that, and then play it back so you can critique yourself on the other side. Arrive 10 to 15 minutes early. So this is one of those things where people kind of get a wide range of what's the appropriate time. Why do we say 10 to 15 minutes early? Well, we say that instead of the 30 to 45 minutes early. It's because if you walk in too early on the 45 to 60 minutes, that interviewer may feel rushed. They have the schedule for the day, so arriving 10 to 15 minutes early shows that you're there, you're not on time, but you're early, but to where the point where you're not so early that that person feels like they have to hurry up with what they're doing to get out there to you because they don't want you waiting in their lobby or in the hall or in their office for 60 minutes. So kind of a good sweet spot is 10 to 15 minutes. For me personally, I always like to arrive at least 30 to 20 minutes early, but then I sit in my car for about 10 to 15 minutes, maybe review some of my notes and some of my prep that I've done, and actually walk inside to the facility within that 10 to 15 minute time frame. Bring multiple copies of your resume. This is always important because maybe you're not interviewing with one person. So maybe you've been coordinating with a couple, or maybe you've just been coordinating with one, but you walk in and maybe it's a panel interview. So make sure that you bring multiple copies of your resume. It's always better to be over-prepared than under-prepared. Greet everyone. I'm a firm believer in this. You want to make sure that you acknowledge everybody that comes up to you, whether it's the receptionist at the front that you have to notify that you're here for your interview. Maybe it's someone just in passing. The reason I say this is because you never know who the person you're talking to is. Maybe it's the CEO, but they're having more of a casual day and they're in jeans and a t-shirt. And if you don't acknowledge them, I can tell you as many times as I've done interviews, I will typically go out to our receptionist and I'll ask, how was your conversation with that person while they were waiting on me? What feedback do you have? Because we want someone that will be willing to communicate and someone that's personable as well and that acknowledges everybody. So you never know who's in front of you. So make sure that you greet everyone. Make eye contact. This is always a big thing. You want to make sure that you're looking the interviewer in the eye and you're making good eye contact. You're smiling throughout the interview, shows that you're excited, that you're happy to be there. You want to develop and use a firm handshake. I know right now that's not the best practice with everything that's going on. So, but when that is allowed again, you want to make sure that you have a firm handshake. And you want to accentuate the positive. What I mean by that is the positive about you, the positive about certain situations, and maybe even positive about some failure that you've had in the past as well. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later. All right, before we move on to the don'ts, is everybody good? Okay. All right, so the don'ts. So you don't want to arrive right on time or late. You don't want to talk too much. So that goes back to the silence is okay. So if the person during the interview, again, you answer the question and you see them taking notes or jotting something down and there's that moment of silence, that is absolutely okay. Don't continue to talk because you may have already provided all the answers that person needs. If you haven't answered the question fully, then that interviewer typically will follow up and then you can add on to the answer you've already provided. But just remember, silence is okay. No chewing gum. You don't want to use inappropriate language, even if maybe you're quoting somebody or you're giving an example. No profanity, no curse words. You don't want to use any sort of inappropriate language. It's just not professional. Bring your cell phone into the interview. So this is kind of one of those, it's up to you. I would say if you're going to bring a cell phone into the interview, turn it off. If not, bare minimum, put it on silence. We as interviewers, we can hear the buzz is buzzing and vibrating in your purse. I promise we can hear that. So either put it completely on silent, leave it in the car, or turn it off altogether. I actually had a candidate one time. He came in, brought his charger, turned around to the outlet behind him, and plugged his phone in to charge during the interview. Our interview quickly came to a halt after that. I said, thank you for your time, because he was more interested in charging his phone than he was the actual job. But definitely don't let the cell phone be your own worst enemy. So turn it off, leave it in the car, and make sure it's definitely on silent, not vibrate. And then again, the don't assume that anyone you meet is unimportant. That goes back to the greet everybody, because you never know who you're speaking with. And I thought this little meme on this was pretty funny. All right, so there are the 3 different types of interviews. Next, I want to transition over to some interview best practices. So interviewers, as they're interviewing you, obviously you want to dress for success. We already talked about that. You want to be aware of your nonverbal and verbal communication. So you kind of have to find that sweet spot, right? So you don't want to cross your arms, because that shows that you're not engaged. If you want to put both feet on the floor, sometimes if you want to cross your legs, whatever that may be, whatever situation you're comfortable in. Definitely don't want to be like lean back in the chair like you don't care. I've had some candidates kind of pull their chair right up to the other side of my desk, and that can be a little uncomfortable too, because it felt like we were sitting down to eat dinner and not conduct an interview, right? So make sure that you're sitting up straight, that you use good posture. Be aware of your delivery and your animation. I'm guilty of it. I speak with my hands all the time. I just tend to be very animated when I'm communicating, and so I have to watch that sometimes, my facial expressions and how much I'm moving my hands, because I want the interviewer listening to the context of my words, not necessarily watching what I'm doing. Presentation of your ideas. You want to make sure that you're presenting everything in a positive light, and again, we're going to speak to that in just a minute. And then your grammar and your vocabulary. You want to speak slowly, you want to be concise, and you want to make sure that you're articulating every word that you have. All right, so have a plethora of examples. So this goes back to the questions of know yourself and know the company. So this is how you're going to build your examples. You want to make sure that you have examples if they're looking for someone that's had leadership experience. So how can you speak to that? If they're looking for somebody that is organized and that can prioritize, how do you speak to that competency? So really utilize the job description and utilize your strengths and weaknesses to outline all of the different examples that you want to touch on. You want to also be prepared for the tough questions. Interviewers are going to tend to focus on your areas of opportunity, so you want to be able to answer to that. And then if there are any negatives, so let's say they ask you the question, I always ask the question is, give me an example of the time that you set a goal you were not able to reach. What is that question asking? That question is basically asking, give me an example of the time that you failed. So for that, it's okay to walk through the examples, but then at the end, you want to mention, what did I learn from that? Turn it into a positive. So yeah, maybe you didn't reach your goal, or maybe there was an element of failure there to that negative connotation, but how do you put a positive spin on it? How do you make it positive and tell the employer or the interviewer, the hiring manager, what you learned out of it? Oftentimes, interviewers may ask why you left a company. You never, ever want to speak badly about a previous company, an employer, or a coworker, right? If there are some differences, you want to find some word track in how you articulate that and said, maybe this just wasn't the best match for me. I love this about the job, but I didn't like this so much about the job. It's okay that you're not in love with every job that you have, but just make sure that if there is that negative behind it, you're giving it that positive edge and how you learned from it and why you feel this next opportunity might be a better match for you. You want to be passionate but balanced. I love when a candidate has that passion for the position and is very excited to be a potential contender for the role with our company. I don't want to hire somebody into the position just to hire them. I want to hire someone that is excited, that sees long-term growth within the company. And I know a lot of other employers feel that way as well. And then you want to have questions prepared at the end. I always ask the candidate, I always allow the candidate, I say, I'm going to let you put me on the hot seat at the end. And I would recommend having at least 1 to 2 questions ready for that interviewer. If I get to the end of the interview, give them a chance to ask, and they say, no, I don't really have anything, well, then I'm kind of wondering, are they really that interested? Did they do enough research on the front end? Or why did nothing come up throughout the interview as we were talking? So always make sure that you have a couple of questions prepared at the end. If you don't have a bank of questions, one thing that you can always ask is how the person got to the role that they're in, what has been their career path, or what do they love most about the company. Those are going to be some pretty easy questions for the interviewer, the hiring manager to answer. And then that will also give you an opportunity to get to know them a little bit more, so kind of building that rapport as we spoke. So there's some overview best practices, and then you want to, as I said, practice in mock interviews. One type of interviewing that I wanted to focus on today with you guys, and we won't spend too much time on it, but it's behavioral interviewing. I don't know if anyone that's involved in the session today has experienced or gone through a behavioral type interview before, but it is one that a lot of employers are moving to. It's a type of interview, and so we'll talk about what is it, what are some examples, and how do you best answer those questions. So behavioral interviewing. Here's kind of the long, drawn-out version of it, but it's basically an approach that the interviewer takes, asking you to reflect on your past experience. So we, as the interviewer or hiring manager, can see how you're going to handle that in the future with our company. So we identify the competencies necessary to carry out the job that we're interviewing for, and we ask those specific skill sets that it takes to do that job, ask you about your past experience in each of those competencies. So some examples of those competencies may be leadership, maybe customer service, teamwork, communication, technical skills. So maybe it's more like an accounting role that needs Excel skills, whatever it may be for that particular position. The employer and the interviewer will line up those competencies, and then they'll ask behavioral type interviews for each of those to see how you've handled those situations in the past, so they can predict how you're going to handle them within their company in the future. So some examples of behavioral type interview, they start with, tell me about a time when. Give an example of. Describe, so give me I'll talk about one for customer service. Give me an example of a time where you had to deal with an upset or difficult customer. That's typically something that we ask at Enterprise. As you guys know, we're a rental car organization. Our employees are dealing with customers on the front line all the time. So I want to hear, how did that person handle maybe a tough customer situation in the past? Because then I know how they're going to handle it with Enterprise and with our teams in the future. So they typically ask, give me an example, tell me a time, describe a situation. They're not open-ended. It's not said something such as, tell me your philosophy on customer service. They're going to ask for some specifics. So when you are asked those types of questions, how do you prepare for them? Well, I've got a couple tips for you. You want to use the STAR method. So the STAR method, as you can see, it stands for situation, task, action, result. So you want to walk through your example. You want to describe to the interviewer, okay, what was the situation? Situation was the customer was upset because of X. What was the task? My task at hand was that I had to satisfy or solve that problem for the customer. A, what was the action? I did X, Y, and Z to solve the issue. And then what was the result? The result was that customer left happy and they actually came back to do business with us again. So really make sure when you're answering those questions, you're touching on each of those for 4 points to provide answers to those behavioral questions. You want to use examples of your previous experiences that relate to the question. So again, it may be something that isn't as obvious. So if they're asking a leadership type question, you can utilize an example of when you led a team in a group project, or you can utilize an example of when you led a team in a voluntary event. So no, maybe you didn't have a supervisor or managerial title, but you were still leading a team of people. So remember, a lot of those skill sets can parallel to what you're doing now in your college careers. Keep in mind what the hiring manager is looking for. So hopefully you already have that information from your research about the job description, the company, and the industry. And then the big thing for me personally, and I know a lot of other interviewers as well, is where people miss the boat is they're not specific. They'll speak in generalities. When I'm a leader, I like to lead by example. Or when I have an upset customer, I like to make sure that they leave happy. Okay, those are great answers. I like the philosophy behind it, but I want a specific example of a time that you led a team, or I want a specific example of a time you helped solve a problem for a customer. So remember, when you're asked those behavioral interviews, be as specific as you possibly can be, so that way it paints a very clear picture for the interviewer. All right, and then in closing to the presentation and to the interview today, so some things that you want to make sure when you're closing the interview. You want to be prepared with questions. We already touched on this a little bit, but you want to make sure that you have at least 1 to 2 questions prepared. When you're preparing those questions, you want to stay away from questions that might trap the interviewer. So asking at the end of the interview, how did I do? Or is there anything that I could have done better today in this interview, right? It's hard to ask those questions because you're basically putting the interviewer in the corner to give you feedback without them having time to digest it as well. Or don't ask, did I get the job? Keep in mind that you may be interviewing with one person, but it may be a multiple step process to that interview and hiring process. So that one person you're interviewing with may not be the final decision maker. So be prepared with questions, but utilize them to not trap that interviewer. You want to use your research and interview preparation to build a strong close. So everything that they're looking for, if they're looking for somebody that's organized, that can multitask, you want to utilize those skills to reiterate after the interview why you want the job and why you're the best person for that job. You want to be very thoughtful and speak to your abilities in addition to what you've already been doing throughout the interview. You want to use the interview to be closing the entire time. So as you're progressing through the interview and as that interviewer is kind of dropping little hints of what they're looking for, leadership, customer service, good communication, strong work ethic, you want to utilize all those things to reiterate to the interviewer that you have those skills to do the job and why you're the best person for it. You want to reiterate your interest in your goals, ask for the job or the next steps. So at the end of the interview, you can say, what are the next steps of this process? I'd be very interested in moving forward in this interview process. Thank you for your time today. I would really like this position, and I think it'd be a great asset to your company. So those are kind of some examples of how you can ask for the job or the next steps. And then follow up with a customized thank you note. So we talked earlier in the presentation about building rapport with that interviewer, finding out some things, asking them about their career. Utilize how you built that rapport to send that customized thank you note at the end, and maybe touch on a couple of things that you talked about throughout the interview as well. So there's kind of the secret sauce from Enterprise of interviewing strategies, how to prep, how to go through different types of interviews, how to close the interview as well. So this is really your time to ask any questions that you may have. And I will leave this screen up if you can, everyone on the call today, visit that URL. You will have to type it in specifically, or you can maybe use it once Tycho sends it over to you electronically, once I get that to her. But what it will do is it will get you signed into our system. It will show that you participated in the call today, and then that way we can reach out to you for future career opportunities that Enterprise may have. But I want to give you guys some time to either turn it off mute and ask me any questions or put something in the chat. You're welcome. Thank you. Okay, I think that's all that we have. Tycho, do you have anything else for me?
Sam, could you maybe share what you think a miscommunicate or a misconception that a lot of students have about either prepping or how to follow up or anything you've heard?
Yeah, I think a lot of times people are afraid to, so let's say that you've had the interview and a couple of days have gone by and you haven't heard anything yet. It's okay to reach back out to that recruiter to follow up to find out the status on the interview process. Now, if they tell you that they're going to be making hiring decisions and they won't get back to you in 7 to 10 days, and then it's only been 5, okay, we don't want to be too eager about it. But I think a lot of times students and just folks interviewing in general, if I let them know that I'm going to be back in touch with them in 24 to 48 hours and they haven't heard from me in maybe 72 hours, it's okay to reach out to that person, because especially if it's maybe a recruiter, they're processing a lot of people, and it's not that they're doing it on purpose and they're not forgetting about you. So don't feel like you are jumping the gun or you're being overly eager to follow up with that recruiter if they haven't gotten back to you in the time frame that they said they would. It's okay. It's not going to offend them. I think sometimes people are afraid that they don't want to push their luck and be too pushy about the process. Now, if they said it's going to be 2 weeks, we'll give the recruiter that 2 weeks to make that decision and get through it. But I think that sometimes that's a big misconception with people, is that they're afraid for the follow-up piece of it, the aftermath of it, of finding out their status.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. If the interviewer asks you to describe yourself, what do you suggest we say? So I suggest that you practice that. It's going to be asked in every single interview, and it's going to be a tough question to answer. Sometimes people don't give me enough, and sometimes people give me way too much. So you got to find that sweet spot. I would say the sweet spot would probably be about 30 to 45 seconds of speaking about yourself. Now, it depends on what you're comfortable with. For me personally, I like to talk about my career at Enterprise, but I also like to talk about some of the personal aspects of where I'm from, what some of my favorite things are. Not a lot, but just 1 to 2. But you want to find that balance of what is some of the experience you've had, whether it's professional, volunteer, schoolwork, athletics. And then if you want to tie in some of the personal aspects of it as well, maybe a hobby or your favorite thing to do, or where you're from, or how you ended up at the college that you did. Something like that to kind of put a little personalization to it, because even though you're in an interview and it is a professional setting, you're also a person. So you want to be able to articulate that to the interviewer as well. I would definitely practice this. If you haven't mastered what to say, practice it, do a mock of it, record yourself, so that way you're not too short, but you're not too long. You're kind of in that sweet spot of 30 to 45 seconds. And then have a couple bullet points of things you'd like to address, whether it's things you've done or some really good skill sets and qualities that you think you bring to the table. Great question, though. You're always going to be asked that question. So tell me about yourself.
All right. Any last questions for Sam? All right. Well, thank you so much for all of your suggestions, all of your insight.
You are welcome. Thank you guys for letting me join in on the virtual fun today. I hope everyone's staying healthy and safe out there.
All right. Well, thank you all very much. And I know, Sam, you're on LinkedIn. So if any of you are interested, feel free to connect with her, shoot her a message. And thank you all really much. And have a wonderful rest of your day. Best of luck.
Thank you very much, Tycho. I'll send this over to you in electronic form if you want to forward it along to the students.
Oh, perfect. I'll forward that to everybody. And this recording will also be on the Career Services YouTube page.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Have a good one.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.